So good afternoon, everybody. I am on the Heartland board, and we had a board meeting this week. And afterwards, we had a board dinner, and a provocateur on the board asked the question about climate and what Heartland is doing. Are we winning? When will we win? And how will we know? And so I can report to you that I think it's today's print edition of the New York Times, there's a story, and the first paragraph reads like this: the most powerful part of President Biden's climate agenda, a program to rapidly replace the nation's coal and gas-fired power plants with wind, solar, and nuclear energy, will likely be ... And I'll finish that later, and so hopefully you'll pay attention. So I am going to talk about this thing that in my world we call reconciliation, and it's sort of, it's bad when you have to explain puns and jokes. The process through which Democrats hope to get this through Congress is called reconciliation. It's a special process that avoids the filibuster. You just need, only a 50-50 tie in the Senate, and then the vice president comes in and breaks the tie, and something becomes law and avoids the filibuster, which typically requires at least a 60-vote majority. So reconciliation, the Clean Energy Performance Program, green taxes, and subsidies. So these are the main climate provisions that the Biden administration is trying to get through Congress right now. They're trying to do this through the stimulus bill. You've all heard this described as the $3.5 trillion stimulus bill supposed to stimulate the economy. It's really just this spending orgy, which people, more realistic economists have priced out at not 3.5 trillion, but 5.5 trillion and even more. And with respect to climate, it has these three main provisions: the Clean Electricity Performance Program, which is the most important, the green taxes, and subsidies. We are going to talk about the Clean Electricity Performance Program last. Now, you might remember during the campaign, Joe Biden swore up and down that he was not going to ban fracking after he said that he was going to ban fracking. And then and that was a very contentious issue with him. Well, last year at this time, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal about, well, Biden doesn't really have the authority to ban fracking, but he can basically nickel and dime it to death. He can, hit it here, hit it there. One of the first things he did when he became president was a commission in the Delaware River Commission banned fracking in 2 Pennsylvania counties. And it's not that there was a lot of fracking going on there, but he banned it anyway. And they also tried to shut down the oil and gas leasing program, which Betty talked about. And what's coming next in terms of fracking is this methane fee idea. And the idea behind the methane fee is that in our system of producing natural gas, distributing it, and burning it, there are lots of leaks. And the climate activists want us to all freak out about methane because supposedly methane is 20 to 30 times more potent a greenhouse gas than, say, carbon dioxide. But I think more realistic assessment would really call methane irrelevant to climate. It must compete with carbon dioxide and water vapor for its warming potential. But those sort of facts don't matter anyway, because none of this is really about climate or the environment. It's really about the left getting control of the economy and how we produce energy, et cetera. So one of the provisions in this stimulus package is a methane fee. They want to, right now there's an existing program for companies who are in the production transmission business to report to EPA if you estimate you have at least 25,000 tons worth of emissions. The provisions here would lower that to 10,000 tons, and then charge emitters $1,500 per ton for leaks over, whatever limit they ultimately decide on. And this is something that could actually go beyond the natural gas industry. This could strike agriculture too. I was talking with someone today. They mentioned, if you assume that a cow emits, say, 4 tons of methane a year, you're looking at $6,000, $6 tax per head of cattle. That's a lot. Whatever costs are being passed, whatever costs are imposed, these are not costs that are just going to be picked up by the oil and gas industry or farmers. These will be passed along in consumer costs. This is, although you would think that big oil, Exxon, BP, Shell, Conoco, those companies would be, loath to allow this to happen. In fact, they are for it. Big oil has lost a lot of its pricing power and its monopolistic power with the advent of fracking. And so they're more than happy to see small independent frackers who, can't afford to fix all these leaks have to go out of business or, be susceptible to takeover. So this methane fee is another way for Joe Biden to crack down on fracking. One of the big issues in the stimulus bill is how do you pay for it? Now, originally when the stimulus bill was written, there was no provision for a carbon tax, but since now everybody's worried about how you pay for this, all of a sudden they're talking about a carbon tax. And it's basically a tax on the production and use of fossil fuels. And of course, that would get propagated throughout the economy, and all costs of all goods and services would have their prices raised because of this. The good news here is that carbon tax is very unpopular. Groups as diverse in view as the Competitive Enterprise Institute and the Washington Post have done polls on the public's willingness to pay in terms of a carbon tax, and they come up with remarkably similar answers. Both CEI and the Washington Post have polls showing that consumers are loath to pay, or most consumers are loath to pay more than $2 a month in the name of climate. And when you start moving that up to maybe $10 a month, you get up to 70–80% against. So it's unpopular. Washington State has tried a referendum on a CO2 tax, and it failed. And of course, a carbon tax is totally regressive because as it raises the cost of staples, of course, that affects poor people most. And not that Joe Biden pledge means much, but it would certainly violate his pledge not to tax those who make less than $400,000, which is the vast majority of Americans. And of course, with any climate policy, no one has yet been able to show me how a carbon tax will change the weather for the better. In addition, after the methane fee, there are lots of subsidies in the Biden climate agenda. Biden wants to have a civilian climate corps. It's like we're in the New Deal, and this is modeled after the Civilian Conservation Corps. Some people have called this like maybe the climate police. This may be a little strong, but I kind of like to think of it as a Hitler Youth. I mean, these are people who are ideologically, this is going to be aimed at young people to brainwash them into thinking about climate, and so they can punish their families and bother everybody, and just it's a good way to get young people on the same page, like other tyrannies have done in the past. There's $10 billion for environmental justice. I don't know, for those of you who follow my Twitter feed, you know how I feel about this. Environmental justice is another hoax. The environment does not treat minorities differently than other people. They are not more susceptible than the majorities in terms of health. This is just, environmental justice. Minorities tend to be poorer than other people. Their problem is poverty. There's nothing in the air. There's nothing in the water that makes them more prone to be ill than anybody else. If you follow me at Junk Science, I constantly talk about how, I've worked on the environment now for 30 years, and I know a lot about it. To the extent that there are air and water quality problems, these are mostly aesthetic in nature. These are not public health issues. Yet, the environmental justice industry has now weaponized the environment. Now it's into a race issue. So, there's all scads of money for that. The electric car industry, General Motors, Ford, and the rest of the car companies, they are looking to increase the subsidies they get for electric vehicles. Right now, they can get a $7,500 tax credit, federal tax credit, on a certain number of cars sold. They want to get rid of the limit, and they want to raise the credit up to as much as $12,500, depending on what kind of car you buy and who made it and where it came from. There are other provisions. They want to tear down highways that cross inner city areas because those highways are racist. There's just all sorts of other billions of dollars of slush funds going on. The most important part of this bill is this thing called the Clean Energy Performance Program. It's the centerpiece of the left's climate agenda at the moment. The ostensible goal, is to produce 80% emission-free electricity from wind, solar, nuclear, and hydro by 2030. The plan calls for electric utilities to be either compensated or penalized, depending on whether they increase their carbon-free emission or carbon-free electricity by 4% per year. It's sort of this Rube Goldberg-esque system that no one's really thought very much about. Payments to the utilities cannot be used or must be used to defray ratepayer costs, because if we go to 80% wind and solar, electricity prices are going through the roof. Penalties paid for not doing anything cannot be passed on to consumers. So the idea is to put pressure on utilities to do something. Now, the most interesting thing about this is that there's nobody, not a person on this planet, the people that came up with this, no one has done an analysis to actually see how this would work. Okay? These people plan to turn our electricity grid upside down, and I mean that literally, upside down, without having done any analysis. So here are some of the details of this. The stimulus bill allocates $150 billion to implement the CEPP. That's the $150 billion. That's going to be the payments to utilities. So the goal once again is 80% no emissions, virtually all new wind and solar, no nuclear. There's no nuclear in this plan. It's just so right now, if you look at the U.S., we are 10% solar, 60% fossil fuels, and the rest is just a mix of nuclear, hydro, and other marginal renewables. So the CEP is going to flip that upside down. Instead of being 10% wind and solar and 60% fossil fuel, the goal is by 2030 to be 10% fossil fuel and 60% wind and solar, with all the other stuff in place. And they're going to do all that for $150 billion. Now, there's another bill that is the companion bill to the stimulus programs called I don't know why, but the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And that has a provision in it to pay for new transmission lines for all the new wind and solar that the CEPP is going to construct. And that's $73 billion. And so if you add those two together, the government plans to spend $223 billion, taking us from 10% wind and solar to 60% wind and solar, and 60% fossil fuels back to 10% fossil fuels. Now, the interesting thing is, since 2004, we've been adding wind and solar to the grid. We're at the 10% mark. That has cost $520 billion already. Okay, and they only plan. So we're going to have 6 times more wind and solar for less than half the cost. How is that going to happen? The depreciated value of our grid today is $2 trillion. A replacement of all the equipment would cost $5 trillion. Now let's just assume that everything, all the sources of electricity on the grid cost the same. Wind and solar are not cheaper than coal or gas, nuclear. Of course, if they were actually cheaper, we wouldn't be having this discussion at all. Everyone would have already moved towards wind and solar. But in fact, In fact, they're more expensive, but let's just assume they're the same cost. So for the sake of argument, if they're the same cost, then 60% of the grids to replace it would be worth $3 trillion. But the CEP, with $3 trillion to replace all the fossil fuel equipment, CEP plans to reduce 83% of that for $223 billion. How does that work out? And of course, it's not going to work out. And the math is pretty simple, as I've showed you. There's not, even if you were going to do this, even if it was a worthwhile goal, there's no way there's enough money. No one has done an analysis on how this could possibly work out. No analysis. Not anyone in the utility industry, not any Capitol Hill staffer, not a spreadsheet, nothing. This is just something that's been completely done on the back of an envelope somewhere, and it is in this bill right now. Based on all this, I can only conclude that this is not intended to work, right? Because if you were serious about doing this, you would have a serious plan. But there is no plan, so it's not serious. But what is the real effect of the Clean Electricity Performance Program? Well, the purpose is to put the grid under federal control. We all have, there are regional grids around the country. They are managed by grid operators and FERC and state public utility commissions. But the CEPP would bring everything under federal control. The federal government would if you like COVID and the way that with public health has been managed, you will love federal government controlling your electricity. The clip I want to show you, I made this comment, the clean electricity power play, it's not intended to work. People naturally think that someone has thought about this and it must be a good faith effort to do something. And, a few months ago, I was watching Tucker Carlson, and this is a great segment. It's not about climate, it's about guns, but the guy talking in the middle, his name is Jesse Kelly, he's a radio guy in D.C., he's very smart. And, he explains how the left thinks about these things. And he sort of explains why, although he's talking about AR-15s, so what's going to happen. In this clip, Joe Biden had nominated the guy on the right, David Shipman, to be head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And the guy's a gun grabber. He's after AR-15s, for example. And so let's listen to what Jesse Kelly has to say. You guys got it queued at the beginning? Yes? Okay.
I don't know why we feel the need to dance around this, because this is what the mistake we make on the right. We hear of AR-15 ban and we hold up some chart that says, well, pistols and fists and stuff, they hurt more people every year. These people know that. David Shipman can read. He's an idiot, but he can read. He knows that. What he wants is the freedom to hurt you, and I don't know why we have to dance around that.
It's such a smart point.
That's right. It's a really smart point. And, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've been thinking of a way to express this to people. The left has the internet as well. They know how to use Google. If they were interested in what we had to say, well, they would debate us, okay? But they're not interested in what we have to say. They don't care. Nothing that they want to do is in good faith, okay? If it was in good faith, we would be having a debate, and we would be talking about the facts, but we don't. Instead, we get this clean energy performance program, which makes absolutely no sense. I mean, if you don't even need to be that smart. You could just, this is just a couple Google searches. They want to spend $200 billion to replace something that costs $5 trillion. How is that going to work? It's not. You don't need to be an engineer. You just need to have some common sense. Where does that work in the world? It doesn't. Okay, so now I will finish reading. Remember, I told you someone posed that question. How will we know when we won? What does winning look like? So the New York Times article reads, the most powerful part of President Biden's climate agenda, a program to rapidly replace the nation's coal and gas-fired power plants with wind, solar, and nuclear energy, will likely be dropped from the massive budget bill pending in Congress, according to congressional staffers and lobbyists familiar with the matter. Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat from Coal-Rich, West Virginia, whose vote is crucial to the passage of the bill, has told the White House that he strongly opposes the clean electricity program, according to 3 of these people. As a result, White House staffers are now rewriting the legislation without that climate provision, and are now trying to cobble together a mix of other policies that could also cut emissions. So how do we know whether we're winning? We're winning. Okay? That is a win. This thing would have federalized the grid. It would have been basically game over for the climate issue. The activists would have, the Democrats would have, the government would have complete power over the electricity grid, which is a lot of what we're fighting for. And so what does winning look like? This is what winning looks like. Now, I don't, why Joe Manchin is from West Virginia. Obviously, you would think it would be a no-brainer for Joe Manchin to oppose this thing. But it's not, because you never know what he's going to do. When Joe Manchin was elected to Congress, to the Senate in 2010, you might remember he had a campaign video where he put a bullet through the cap and trade bill, which was then working its way through Congress. He put a bullet through it. It was really remarkable. And so he gave the image of this tough guy coming to Washington to kill that bill. Well, the bill did die eventually. But Manchin never really turned out to be much of a coal supporter. I worked in the coal industry at the time, and while Joe Manchin has been in the Senate, half of West Virginia's coal industry has gone away. Manchin never before broke any China to save the coal industry. Now, if this report is true, I think this is an example of the great work Heartland does. I mean, it's not that Joe Manchin follows the Heartland Institute, but we have quite a reach out there, and we have set ourselves up for the successes that we can have. And the successes are, this is a battle that's going to go on for a long time. There's no end date for this. The left has been around for 100 years trying to, turn our country, and they're not going to give up regardless of what happens with this bill. But we need to defeat them as where we can. And so I think it looks like we have defeated them on this Clean Electricity Performance Program, which was what they really what the climate alarmists really wanted. They want control of the energy grid, and they're not going to get that, at least for now. We have to keep fighting, and that's what I plan on doing, and I hope you will join me. Thank you.